All eyes in the financial world will be trained on a small resort in Wyoming on Friday for one of the most anticipated speeches by the US Federal Reserve Chairman Bernanke. Before he makes his address in Jackson Hole, US GDP figures are expected to be revised downward, and the chairman will need to explain what the Fed is going to do about the economy, and some investors hope he may hint at a third round of quantitative easing. Joining me from New York to discuss what we can expect is Richard Ross, who is a global technical strategist from Auerbach Grayson. Thanks very much for joining me, Richard. With the US economy still struggling, markets are really hoping Bernanke can say something positive. What does he need to say?
Well, those are, of course, the million-dollar question right now. What I think he needs to do is ensure the world that the economy remains on track, that the fears of a double-dip recession are overblown, and that QE1 and QE2 are not the abject failure that most people have deemed them to be. I think the specter of QE3 looms large overhead. I think it's a case of be careful what you wish for, as we've seen the stunning failure of the previous two historic quantitative easing. So while we would like to see support for the economy here, these artificial measures that the government continues to pursue don't seem to be the panacea that at first we thought they might be.
The problem for a lot of investors could be the gap between their expectations and what the Fed can realistically do. So my next question is slightly different to what he needs to say. What do you think he will say?
Well, I think he will state in no uncertain terms that the government remains committed to keeping this economy going, to doing whatever it is that they need to do, that they are a friend of the economy, not a foe. And while that seems somewhat intuitive by nature, throughout history we have seen where the government has put their foot down and said enough is enough, you are going to have to do this on your own. And Ben Bernanke, we talk about the fact he is an ardent student of the Great Depression, and he will do whatever he can to avoid that type of situation, that type of devastating depressionary scenario that we saw back in the 1930s. So I think he's going to come out again, as he has done in the past, maintain that we will continue to keep interest rates at historically low levels, to keep monetary and fiscal policy extraordinarily accommodative, and to support this economy in any way they can. Now, whether or not that's what we need remains to be seen, but that's been his stance throughout his stint, and that is what he is going to do going forward. He has shown that he is there to provide the stimulus, to be accommodative rather than adversarial when it comes to the economy. He's not a fan of tough love, if you will. He's very coddling and supportive and nurturing, but as we know, sometimes that can, the byproduct of that nurturing can be an impetuous, almost a spoiled child syndrome. So we have to be careful what we wish for here in the U.S.
Now, you mentioned quantitative easing earlier. QE2 was first hinted at this very speech last year, which has raised speculation we might get a hint at QE3 Friday. Will we? And is that what the economy needs?
Well, I think the U.S. economy needs something, but at some point we're going to have to take the training wheels off and see if she can ride on her own. We cannot continue to pump these artificial means into the economy. It's almost a financial steroids, if you will. As I said, at some point the healing process must begin. We have to take this medicine away and see if she can stand on her own 2 feet. Whether that time is now remains to be seen. We might be so fragile that to take away the stimulus at this point would be financial suicide. What's interesting is that we have very low interest rates right now. That should be enough of an incentive to get that capital spending going, to get investors off the sidelines into the markets, purchasing homes, investing in mortgages, etc. And the fact that it's not is very telling. It's eerily reminiscent of what we saw in 2008 when those interest rates plummeted along with stocks and commodities, more of a deflationary scenario. So right now the market is really pricing in a lot of fear and the specter of an economic slowdown and potential double-dip recession.
Finally, Richard, the anticipation ahead of Friday's address is huge. Is all this speculation any good for the economy, and are the markets hoping for a bit too much from the chairman?
But I'm a firm believer that markets are going to trade where they want to trade, regardless of these exogenous shocks or sound bites that might come out of what happens in Jackson Hole. If the market wants to go higher, it will go higher, and if it wants to go lower, it will use any excuse to do so. So I'm not a big fan of hoping and holding. I'm an analyst. I do my work. I don't wait around for speeches and for other people to dictate what I do and what my work is telling me. So that's kind of how I go forward. I do the same thing every day, regardless of what speeches are on the calendar on that particular day.
Well, that's all we have time for, but many thanks for joining me, Richard. As always, there is plenty more to keep you updated on Dukascopy TV. Goodbye.